Bona tarda. Empezamos, si os parece. Bona tarda, muy bienvenidos a Elisava. Estamos encantadísimos de teneros a todos vosotros aquí y, por supuesto, estamos encantadísimos de tener a Susan Meiselas hoy con nosotros. Bienvenidos a esta tercera charla de esta serie de conferencias Master Talks que organiza Elisava y que coordina Marc Panero. Presentar y hablar de la obra de un artista o de una fotógrafa con la fotógrafa presente es siempre una temeridad que voy a evitar. Pero sí que me gustaría, para aquellos que, aunque la conozcáis, quizás daros otra visión o otro punto de vista tanto de la obra como de la propia Susan. Susan es, como probablemente todos sabéis, es miembro de la agencia Magnum desde 1980 y desde mi punto de vista es una de las fotógrafas más importantes de su generación. Y no solo es una de las más importantes, sino que es una de las fotógrafas que construyó lo que entendemos hoy en día por la fotografía documental contemporánea. Yo creo que sin el trabajo de Susan y otras personas de su generación no tendríamos la práctica documental de la fotografía como existe hoy. Su trabajo está, sobre todo, yo creo que si algo lo caracteriza es el trabajo sobre los derechos humanos y la crítica política y social. Y desde mi punto de vista hay dos grandes características de su trabajo. Una es el tiempo. El tiempo no entendido como algo literal, como ¿no? La fotografía al final es tiempo, es luz y tiempo. No desde ese punto de vista, sino desde el punto de vista del tiempo para hacer los proyectos, el tiempo para reposar los proyectos, el tiempo para investigar, el tiempo de tener paciencia, el tiempo de dedicar. Que creo que además cobra especial relevancia en unos tiempos de inmediatez y de las fotografías efímeras que nos rodean y que creo que no tanto daño están haciendo a la práctica contemporánea de la fotografía. Y esto estoy seguro que bien lo saben o deberían saberlo nuestros alumnos. Y una consecuencia de este uso del tiempo sin prisas es que, desde mi punto de vista, las fotografías de Susan atraviesan la capa superficial de la fotografía, investigan las causas y las consecuencias de los temas que plantea, yendo al lado social y humano y poniendo de relevancia lo que realmente creo que es importante en una fotografía y es lo que está siempre detrás de la fotografía y no lo que es visible, ¿no? Huyendo de esa espectacularidad tantas veces usada, de la violencia, ¿no? de lo banal, y que tanto daño también ha hecho y está haciendo, yo creo, a la fotografía contemporánea. Y desde ese punto de vista de atravesar esa capa superficial, su trabajo yo creo que es un claro ejemplo del ensayo visual, que también es un género que está lamentablemente cada vez más en desuso. Y una de las consecuencias es que podríamos considerar su trabajo no solo un trabajo fotográfico, sino por supuesto un trabajo documental, pero también un trabajo antropológico. Tenía una cita que quería resaltar de la propia Susan, que dice: «La cámara es una excusa para estar en un lugar al que no pertenecerías y me da un punto de conexión y un punto de separación». Y creo que esa cita define muy bien el propio trabajo de Susan. No voy a hablar de las innumerables expos colectivas individuales que ha tenido, una de las últimas aquí en Barcelona en la Fundació Tapies hace un par de años, ni tampoco de los numerosísimos premios que ha recibido, entre ellos el premio Hasselblad, que está considerado como el premio Nobel de fotografía, y recientemente el Deutsche Börse Photography Prize en Londres, del que fue finalista una profesora del máster de fotografía de Elisava, Laia Abril, que es profesora aquí con nosotros. Tampoco hablaré de su cantidad innumerable de publicaciones ni de premios, y quería acabar con otra cita que creo que también resume muy bien su trabajo, y dice así: «Quería que la imagen fuera lo que te atrae a querer saber más. Y creo que eso es cierto para cualquiera de las imágenes que hago. Sé que las fotografías pueden ser poderosas en sí mismas, pero son solo visiones para saber más. Ya sea que vivan en paredes o en páginas de revistas, son ventanas a otros mundos sobre los que quieres saber más. Eso es lo que, para mí, importa». Thank you very much, Susan. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Gracias.
Activo. Ahora sí. ¿Cómo empezar? Primero decir lástima, pero no vas. No voy a hablar todo el tiempo en español, pero solo que ustedes saben. Entiendo muy bien, pero me da mucho preocupación porque hago muchas fallas en español. Primero, gracias a Mark, porque you can't imagine his patience and persistence. I was not the easiest person to kind of stay with the idea of coming. We kept changing dates. So I thank you for that. And I also thank all of you who made those wonderful dishes out in the hallway. I wanted to sit at the table when you had breakfast a few weeks ago. I mean, it reminded me of Judy Chicago and the famous at the dinner party. The minute I walked in, I felt you connected to history. So it's hard to know what a place is when you're reading about it from a website or from far. And trying to think about what I can contribute to thinking from all the various. I took one kind of thread, the thread that I hope you can relate to, because I want you to just get inside the process of evolving a life, an unpredictable life, and how you begin that kind of an adventure. You're all in different paths. I know you're not all photographers, but just something to give you that feeling. So I'm showing you not only a photograph I made in the first series of photographs, but from the 70s, and then the way in which the 70s launched me in a sense, but also how those photographs live in the time and beyond that time. So that's kind of the territory of what I'll try and touch tonight. I really rediscovered this photograph, which is one of maybe a handful of self-portraits, and it's still the most symbolic for me. We did a survey that some of you may have seen at the Tapias Foundation 2 years ago, and this picture kind of reappeared, and it was haunting because it seemed so exactly what I understood then and that I still understand now, to both find a way to be present and invisible. And that's, I think, a very particular space that is the only space that's comfortable for me. So maybe you'll understand that as we go along. So what else can I tell you? The idea of having a camera in my hand was not the most obvious. I took one class, and I wasn't in a university. I didn't go to a master's in art school, etc. But I did get a master's in education, and I was very much a Marshall McLuhan influence, maybe, the global village, the future of how photography would influence us. And I began in a public school teaching kids who were in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, 10, 11, 12, making pinhole cameras out of shoeboxes, if you can imagine that, very long time ago in many ways. But I did take one class, and that class was with a 4x5, and the work that I did began with, how would I say, having to imagine carrying that camera and going into a space that wasn't my own. I lived in a boarding house. It meant that we shared halls, we shared a kitchen, we shared a bathroom, but I didn't know anybody else living in that house, that boarding house. So that was the first step of what do you do with a camera with the neighbors who you don't really know, and of course each knock on each door felt like a trespassing of one kind or another. And that was what was awkward. I didn't like the power of that relationship right from the beginning, and the first work that I did was a series of my neighbors in which each time I made what was a contact sheet and brought it back to them, I asked them to write about how they saw themselves differently than the camera might have portrayed them. And that began, I think, the kinds of questions that have really been continuous in one way or another, trying to resolve the inequality of that representation of a camera to a subject. Who is the subject? How do they speak in response to the image that you make? And struggling with that and trying to find other ways. So even though when I did the exhibition, it was the photographs of mine with the various pieces of paper they had written their responses to. So I'm not going to show you every project of the 70s, but I'm going to highlight shift points because I think that's maybe the most useful in a relatively short time. At the point that I'm teaching, I'm also traveling in the summers, and one of the things I come across is something called the Girl Show. The Girl Show I had never heard of, I had never read of, but I'm walking down a public fairground where there are carnivals, rides, games, kind of like the one you have right on the water here, you know, those carousels, cotton candy, etc. And in the midst of all that is this girl show. And the girl show is showing girls. And of course, nothing surprising there. But as you can see in this photograph, the idea of this woman with all these men, the man on the left has the microphone and is determining who she is, what's possible. The man below her selling tickets. The man in the gate, just in that center, is saying no ladies and no babies. So it's very clear. I need to figure out how to get in there, quite honestly. But, you know, not at that moment, not at that time, but I'm imagining I'm being excluded. So this is not a new story. I mean, for any of you in the early 70s, many women felt excluded. But the work begins on the outside, in the fairgrounds, where anybody could have been making photographs and may have been making photographs. And I think you can see already I'm trying to make frames that have some kind of complex dynamic of what I would call multifocal, not just a single. Lena was in the center, and there were many people around her, and here you have different relationships graphically, etc. So I'm trying to compress as much of a narrative inside a frame very often. Not always, but certainly often enough. Here's another example of what's on the outside. So anybody in the fairground could come and look at these women and dream of being with these women. Very quickly, I knew that I wanted to find a way to get to know who these women were. And essentially, this is the first summer. I come back a second summer. And by the time I'm coming back the second summer, the manager of the show welcomes me because he even recognizes me. I mean, I don't know if you can see from way back there, but you know, what strikes me, and this woman's name was Shorty. I called it Shorty on the Valley. She has a scar still from the birth. She gave birth with a cesarean. The bruises, the fingernails. I mean, of course, it's all that kind of detail, which is a different kind of frame compared to the one I was talking about before. But the important thing about process is how to dive into the dressing room, which is a different dynamic, where the managers come and go, where the women cohabitate, and each one performs to a 45 record. And I'm interested in this working life that starts to unfold. The girl shows go from one town to another town, so the relationships are challenging for me because they're not always the same girls. Sometimes they leave, they run off with guys, or they go home. And I'm trying to also understand the architectural space. So I'm moving from the outside of the show that everyone has access to the dressing room, and it's through the women that they pull the curtain back and I see the men that they're performing for. So this process is, I then spend a third summer doing, again, coming back. And this picture is really one of the ones that is one of the most iconic for me because it is this, I identify with a certain kind of self-determination of those women at that time. In other words, they felt earning their own way, the independence, the open road, the cash in their pocket, gave them the freedom that gave them what they were searching for. I hope this is going to work because we didn't test this. There's the answer mark. It doesn't work. Well, this was a sound piece that I was hoping you could hear, but it doesn't seem like it's going to play. This is Lena speaking. I want just you to hear voices because the important thing of this project for me was moving from what was written in the first project you saw, people's handwriting about their representation. Here, in this project, over the period that I'm working, I'm collecting the sound of the managers, of the girls, of the clients, and throughout that project, I'm capturing something like 200 hours of tape, and that's the first way I represent the work, which if you did see Tapias, the show 2 years ago, you would have seen there were phones on the wall, and you could have heard the collage of those voices. But in fact, the way I represented it was in a central room where you heard these voices and you saw the photographs around. So they weren't tied illustratively in the way a movie would tie a voice to an image, but the idea that you're getting a feeling of the whole environment. So I'm thinking already in this period of this is early 70s, 72, 3-4, trying to think about what beyond the frame of the photograph that I'm experiencing I can bring into the photograph, and I just said something to someone the other day that maybe if I'd had an iPhone 10 in 1972, I would have made a movie, because it's incredible that technology lets you do today. But I made a book, and the book was made out of essentially a transcription of the tapes. And the second edition of the book, which was more recent, it was released in 2003. So the first book comes out in 76, Carnival Strippers, the second, 2003. And in there, I was able to put a CD. And I'm mentioning this because I know you have design and technology. You're all coming from different places. That was incredible to be able to put a physical CD in the back of the book in 2003. And of course, now no one uses CDs. So, you just have to keep adjusting. And I'll show you a little later another kind of shift. But this was an important shift in a different sense. Pedro mentioned that I joined Magnum. This is the portfolio I showed to Magnum. At the time, I had done the work before I joined Magnum. And then that joining, and I think not knowing maybe even what some of you do know now, I knew that much less. In other words, I didn't really know what it meant to join a community. I didn't know anybody inside that community. But it definitely opened up a new path for me. And so I'm going to show you the shift because I'm interested in sort of you're seeing how different intersections can shift, and whether you call it navigating or recalibrating, it's kind of how you open yourself to different kinds of possibilities, and what it leads you to that you can't imagine. And that's, I think, the important thing I want to instill in you, to follow the unpredictable paths you'll find for yourselves. So part of what Magnum is a room in a office building, and people coming and going, and I don't even know in how long they're going away. I think when you go, you don't know if you're even going to return, how long you might stay someplace. But this question of how do you find a way to belong to a particular place that's not your own is, I think, a central idea again. Not that different in a way than the neighbor next to me that I didn't particularly even think of knowing until I made the photograph, which opened up that door to my knowing. And likewise, going to Nicaragua was a very different kind of opening. I had read about Nicaragua at the point of the assassination of a man named Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was the opposition newspaper editor, assassinated by Somoza, who I didn't realize at the time, but found out soon after that the Somoza government had been supported by the U.S. for 50 years. So how do you learn about what your government does? We all have imperial pasts of different kinds, colonial pasts, etc. So that really, that kind of was a reason on itself, just being an American trying to understand the relationship of the U.S. to Nicaragua at that point in time. I also want to say that, there's something about documentary that people forget, and very often we see documentary now that's driven by portraiture or reenactment, and I'm really speaking about something that's really a reportage, a way of working in which you go into the field not knowing what will unfold, but just a leap of faith in a sense. And in this case, I landed in a process that the country was transforming. progressively over a period that I stayed was about a year. But, you know, when you're making these photographs, I mean, at the time I'm making them, I'm not thinking yet about how historical they'll become, and whether or not they'll be of any value in some sense, you know. I mean, I'm making them one by one, not day by day, not week by week, but just progressively putting together what in some ways are like puzzle pieces, you know. I don't know. I'm finding my way. I'm feeling my way. I'm trying to understand what's happening in this place. And I think, you know, how do you become a trusted observer is something that you'll in a way start to feel, but it's not something I'm assured of. So I'm definitely thinking about photography in its very timely way, and it's also timeless way. You know, there's that tension between this moment forever, which is frozen, and then how we understand it as we go on. And you'll see the way that unfolds. So I'm making pictures that I'm already starting to think the picture of this present in the future will be seen as the past. And that's a particular shift. It's not something I was thinking about with Carnival Strippers or other projects in that period. But this is the shift point because history is unfolding. And as history unfolds, we don't know from today into tomorrow. And we'll come back to that theme at the end. But that's what's happening. And I'm thinking not really as a news photographer, though I might look like I'm one when my photographs are published in various magazines. I'm not on assignment for anyone. I'm generating work, and Magnum's distributing work, which is a very specific relationship. I mean, it's different than being told what it is that we want from whichever country you're working for. So it's responding really to the streets, to the protagonists, and where histories are going to lead. So you all can read this, I'm sure. What you maybe can't read is what's under the white paint, but you probably have walls like this around Barcelona. You use your walls in a way the Nicaraguans do. It's not just tagging, you're messaging, right? In the case of Nicaragua, it was for censorship. It was the controlled space in various neighborhoods that were already confronting disappearances and trying to find a way to make that visible to someone who might have been pulled out of that very house. But would the neighbors know that it was a disappearance? Would the family know? So I'm starting to learn a new language, which is how to visualize abuses that I'm hearing about. I can't always see them in action, right? But I'm feeling them, and I think, you know, this is an expression of that, the armed search down the same neighborhood where that graffiti was. I'm also dealing with what it's like to be making a picture of someone. What does he know or think? We've seen many examples since then of what, you know, photographers being directly assaulted, making the pictures they're making in many countries. And particularly now, and we're reading about, but we're not seeing what's happening in Iran, for example, with hundreds of people being killed as they protest. So this looks very tame when you think about those images you're reading about today. This is still, there's an underground movement building against Somoza. So everyone is taken off the bus, everyone's interrogated, and they're looking for signs that might indicate the extent to which someone has been affiliated with the underground movement. And this was not that much further down the road where that, not necessarily on the same day, but that same kind of bus was stopped going up a hill. And this is the execution spot, which was the anonymous bodies that were pulled out of houses, were dumped on this hillside. It was called the Cuesta del Plomo. And people always wondered if it was because of the pistol, the plomo, or if it was because it was such a hill that it was so heavy for traffic to go up. It's right at the pinnacle, about a mile out of the center capital of Managua. If you were to see that moment, that place now, there's a small cross that represents all the people that are buried below. So when you make that photograph, I mean, many people have discussed the violence of making photographs, witnessing photographs, whether or not one should or shouldn't make a photograph. I made one photograph with a color camera, and I made one frame on a black and white contact sheet, and I left. And it's important to say that, even without showing it to you, because it's an acknowledgement of the fear that I had that someone would see me making the photograph. So some of you would understand that in various parts of the world. That's exactly the danger, is being the witness, having the evidence, etc. So this is also a shift point for me, because this is the first time that any of my photographs are obviously on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. So I was there in the period of the underground movement was still, for the most part, underground in June through July 1978. And the palace, the National Palace, gets taken about a month after I return from Nicaragua to New York. So I'm not yet on assignment. I'm still not working with, for the media, but I consider that I begin to shift working with the media. And there's a definite difference of, I think there'll be people interested in what I'm doing versus carnival strippers. I don't think anyone's going to be interested. I'm just making these photographs. So the war begins pretty rapidly after the National Palace. The people were, it was a hostage situation, and then very quickly after, the insurrection, the September insurrection began, and 5 towns insurrected with a combination of Sandinistas and what was called muchachos at the time, and of course Somoza's tanks rolling in. So as I said to you, I was working, and I want you to kind of just have a feeling of what the working was at this time. I'm making photographs with black and white film in one camera and color film in another, and they're different to some degree. Sometimes I miss in color, like this. I wish I had in color, and it's a one and only frame in black and white. And I think a lot about this because everyone now shoots digital, desaturates, no problem. But you're making choices, and they're very spontaneous, they're very instinctive, and they're, you don't get to go back necessarily. So that's, I think this idea of how does that relate, the power of this feeling of people in the streets making history was propelling me to stay longer or come back to New York to see my film and return from Nicaragua. To Nicaragua, back and forth, and back and forth in and out of towns where the army could be coming in one, what was called the National Guard, or the muchachos were coming and defending a neighborhood. This you see is Masaya. For those of you who know a little bit of Nicaraguan, at least one person in this room knows exactly where this is, in Masaya. And Somoza was bombing, consistently bombing wherever the insurrection had taken hold in September. So the towns, the insurrections were quelled, and everyone went underground again. I'm not going to give you the whole history, but I'm going to now shift, again, a shift point, and a shift point that comes essentially because I make this photograph. Now, this is now at the end of the time I'm in Nicaragua, 78, 79. It's a photograph that has the name now, the Molotov Man. The Molotov Man is made in the town of Esteli, which is in the north, a different area than Masaya. And it's the day of the eve that Somoza leaves the country, which again becomes symbolic. I mean, many people have looked at this photograph, and because we're in Spain and because we're in Barcelona, I have to say, it was not made by Robert Capa, obviously, but many people have said, really, you didn't see that photograph? I have no idea if my eyes had seen that photograph. I don't think I had the time or the mind to think, I'm just going to make a photograph just like Robert Capa. But it's been written as such. The historians, the theorists, they have lots of ideas. I'm sure at the moment I'm making this picture, and I'm going to show you why, I missed the picture with the black and white film completely. So I don't think I had any pre-visualized concept of what I was doing except trying to capture a moment, which was very passionate, and I'll come back to that. So this book is made in at the end, there's a triumph, 1979, July 19th. It's this extraordinary event in Latin America. It's the first revolutionary victory, you could say, after Cuba. Some of you would know this history and all the various failed attempts in between. No one is expecting it. Nobody who was studying Latin American history and whatever they were dreaming or imagining, there was no guarantee. And suddenly it happens. So, the making a book has so many different lives in and of itself, and I'm just going to touch a little on this idea of a bicultural object. So there's a book. The photographs are separated from the text because it's translated into French, Spanish, and also has an edition in English. And what's complicated is I'm thinking about all those different cultures as well as the Nicaraguans themselves. Who is this book for? Who are the pictures I'm making for? So not only I'm thinking about that at the time that I'm making the photographs are circulating. So I come back after making the book, and the first exhibition is a very different kind than what I was describing with carnival strippers. It's more the three layers of what happens to the photographs. So if you look in the middle, you'll see the pages of the book, interrupted by a framed photograph. Already, photographs were starting to be bought as art. Below are color Xeroxes of photographs that I might have included but didn't, so what you'd call outtakes. And then above are the various international publications that were choosing different photographs, representing different photographs. And if any of you saw Tapias, you saw the full rendering of this show that I did in 1982 and essentially hadn't been seen since then. So the other idea that I was beginning to experience was really the reappropriation of photographs back into the community for the purposes they had. And in this case, this is a tourist poster made in Masaya, the place of Monimbo, the neighborhood where I'd made the photograph. Of course, it's flopped. If you really had good eyes, you would have noticed that. They didn't call me up and say, what about making a poster? The way someone came up, Pepe is somewhere here, told me about a poster he had of a mask. It's not this mask photograph, but pictures circulate, right? That's part of this magical world where we live in. But I wanted, of course, I felt the Nicaraguans owned this history. It was their history. I happened to have been there, which was a privileged experience in many ways. But as the pictures come back, they come back in lots of different ways, and they get used in a lot of different ways. So I'm sharing with you what I was learning about what happens to pictures, or at that time happened to this picture in particular, for example, is the Molotov Man, who's on the matchboxes that celebrate the first anniversary of the Nicaraguan Revolution. I find out when I get there to see the first anniversary. So this idea of a reappropriation was actually welcome, but this question of the migration, of images begins to catch my eye, and I become somewhat obsessed with the idea of the life of an image. This is also made in that period of time, the revolutionary Christians, because he's wearing a cross, so they claim him as their hero. I told you he was from Esteli. This is a wall in Masaya, the same town I showed you a picture of, where he joins Carlos Fonseca and others. We were talking, Ramon and I, about Carlos Fonseca and other heroes of Nicaragua. And then the Contra War begins in the early 80s, 83, 82, 83, 84, etc. And he's used as a stencil, right, to mobilize a popular militia to fight against the Contra who are coming in from Honduras and Costa Rica. So, of course, I think this is particularly pertinent for you all, No Pasaran. That migrates to Nicaragua, right? Interesting how that happens. And the Contra see the photograph and use the photograph in a stencil, raising money to fight the war against the Sandinistas. And 10 years later, when I go back, I see the same wall, and it's been blackened. And it's blackened just at the point in time when the Sandinistas are up for an election in 1990. So those of you who know the history know that it was Ortega at that time. Of course, he's president now, which makes it complicated, but we'll get to that. In fact, at this time, he loses electorally, and Violeta Chamorro, the wife or the widow of the man that I first heard of when, 10 years before, becomes president. And, the blackening, this idea of blackening out, we often see documents that are blackened out. We shouldn't know the history. We shouldn't know details. This is sort of an erasure, this question of what you erase of history. And boy, is that a deep question here in Spain. So I'm not going to go further on that path, but you know what I'm talking about. So my response is to actually go back to Nicaragua and see if I can find the people in my photographs on this eve of the 10th election of the 10 years after the revolution had been the triumph of the revolution. And with two friends, I make a film called Imágenes de la Revolución, and we take the book, and I'm just going to show you a short clip because we don't have that much time, of finding one person.
Disculpe, señora, ¿usted conoce Augusto López González? ¿Augusto? López González. No lo conoce. ¿No conoces este nombre? López González. La familia López González no viven aquí.
Aquí tal vez a este lado del cementerio buscando media cuadra para arriba.
Bueno, gracias, señor. Señor, hola, buenas tardes, buen día. Señor, yo no sé si te puede ayudarnos. Estamos buscando un hombre que salió en una foto que yo tomé hace 10 años. Esta es la foto.
Ajá.
¿Tú conoces este hombre?
Augusto.
Augusto.
Sí.
¿Augusto cómo?
¿Ah?
Augusto.
Tío mío.
¿Es tío tuyo?
Sí.
¿En serio?
Sí.
Ahora.
Ya está viejo.
Pero
yo
siempre,
también.
el mismo soy.
Pero ya tiene buena producción, mira.
Sí, estas son, esta es la mayor.
Ajá.
Esta la sigue.
Ajá.
Ever, vení. Esta es la que sigue, la chela le sigue a esta y esta le sigue a esta.
A ver.
Son las 6.
¿Y qué es esto?
Por donde sale apuntando los guardias, donde es el cine Masaya.
Sí,
Por
atrás del cine.
Sí.
Eso fue por donde fue tomada la foto.
Ahí se la tomó.
¿Pero qué es esta cosa?
Yo no sé, a él se la dieron, pero no sé qué aún.
81 barricada. Es increíble.
Y para algo.
Anyway.
Está mi papa.
Exacto.
I think I knew they were fighting very close to the cuartel in the plaza. I had heard, I think, that they were very close to taking the cuartel, which sat right on this main plaza. And so I circled around in a far circle to come in closer behind where they were. And that's when I came across Augusto. I, of course, didn't know his name. I maybe was in that doorway probably longer than in many places because it was a good protected position, but maybe 15 minutes. It's hard to remember the time.
Cuando tú me tomaste las fotos, no una, sino 2 o 3 fotografías, estábamos en plena insurrección del 79. Estábamos del Comando de la Guardia Nacional una cuadra abajo. Estábamos por tomar el comando. Estábamos luchando con las manos, con las uñas, con las bombas de contacto y con los rifles 22, porque no teníamos armas automáticas, sino nosotros luchamos con las uñas.
Te pego.
¿Ya? Cuando tú me tomaste esta fotografía, me acuerdo yo que a mí me dieron el 22 apenas con 6 tiros. Y cuando la guardia se bajó de arriba para abajo, entonces fue que le dije, allá va la guardia.
need to believe it was possible to change something. That's why I was so powerfully moved in Nicaragua, because they were willing to risk their lives just believing in the possibility. I mean, there was nothing assured that they would win. There was no way they could have known. No one believed it was possible. And so, you know, seeing a man on a street with a gun was the most vulnerable act, and yet a tremendous affirmation. So if I made an image, I framed it, I saw it as a heroic moment, and then the image took on a life of its own and became a greater symbol. Coming back and meeting Augusto, I wanted to see the man behind that symbol, but it's very painful.
This is a 90-minute film. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but I felt like you had to have a feeling for the process of finding someone, and this is the page of the book. I'm turning the pages of the book one by one. I'm asking people, anybody know who this person is, where they could be? You maybe could do that in Barcelona. I don't think you could do it in all of Spain because it's too big, too many people, but Nicaragua, you know, there were 3 million people at the time I was doing this, and amazingly, I found not everyone, but quite a number of people. And the Molotov Man, of course, was one of them. And I discovered his name was Barreta, his pseudonimo in the war, Pablo Arauz, and have had a relationship with him ever since. And I'll give you a little tease of what happens in his life. He becomes the T-shirt on the 20th anniversary celebrating the revolution. I get a postcard from a friend, and it turns out that he's appeared again, but this time as something like an 8x10 canvas painted in a gallery. And when I see that, I really understand that something else is happening. So I have a feeling I have a social contract with Pablo, or different than the photographs being used for the semáforo. Whoops, I just forgot the word. No, how do you say matches? Fósforo, sorry. So you say a different word, you see. But you know, the way this opened up a very complicated process, because now we have the internet, and this picture becomes part of a dialogue, and who owns the rights to the photograph. People misunderstand and think it's a question of copyright, and I'm not really thinking about copyright. So you see the Pepsi label, they think that Pepsi owns the copyright of the photograph. There's total confusion. What I was upset about was that the painting was under the title Riot. And if any of you know the difference in English between riot and revolution, there's a big difference. I think a riot could lead to a revolution, but a revolutionary gesture is different than a riot in and of itself. So what begins in this period of the internet is something that was called the Joy War. And, you know, I saw the opportunity of artists, and I think this is important for all of you. You know, the origins are forgotten too quickly in the pixel exchanges that we can do so easily now. So my protest was really about one artist taking the work of another without even an exchange, the considered email or telephone call or something that would make it a collaborative act. And I think that's really an important idea, that it became a conflict over rights potentially, but it really was about a different kind of reappropriation than I felt the Nicaraguans deserved. And I think it's something that we see a lot. So we have to be conscious of. So this was the copyright war. That was the other side of that postcard. And I'll give you just a teaser. So nothing could be different in my mind. It wasn't about our revolution, as Pepsi, etc. So Molotov Man, Barreta, becomes a symbol. He's again the symbol for the 25th anniversary. His hometown celebrates him with a monument, of course. And on the 25th anniversary of the Triumph, 2004, I go back with murals, and this time it's a different question. It's a question of what does the photograph mean to those who haven't lived the revolution, because by 25 means more than half the country are under 25. What have they heard? What do they understand? What does it mean to them? Those kinds of questions. So the murals came back to, there were 19 murals to honor July 19th in 4 different towns. And I'm also photographically trying to see if I can make photographs that are both a fusion of the past and the present in this particular way. And at that same time, another edition of the book is made of Nicaragua, and for the 30th anniversary. And at that point, I'm really, again, trying to struggle with this question of how do you recontextualize. The book is sort of frozen as a facsimile book of the book that I made 30 years before, essentially, and that seems strange, but it is the reference set that I use for Pictures from Revolution. I keep going back to my archive to see what else there is, but I'm not changing anything. Of course, other people do second and third editions of books and make those choices, but I'm keeping it as a set, as this reference set, for whatever reasons. So I'm going to show you what happens with the 30th anniversary, which I hope you can follow. This is a customized app called Look and Listen.
Yo me vengo dando cuenta de la realidad de nosotros los pobres, con un gobierno que defiende los intereses capitalistas. De allí es cuando nosotros nace esa conciencia de luchar por los pobres, que somos pobres, pero nosotros luchamos por aquellos que todavía no se deciden. Entonces, pues, el carácter personal mío, eso me impulsó a dar ese paso de sumarme a la lucha.
So, augmented reality is just an amazing thing. I'm sure there's so much more that one could do. This app I customized with somebody from Barcelona, actually. It was an experiment with the book, but it also works with an exhibition. It works off of the image, so it's visual recognition, which is the key trigger. But, I think conceptually, it wasn't just use the technology, it was trying to figure out how do you break open an object to reconnect people to a subject, right? So it's a very specific idea. And, of course, this ongoing question of how do these pictures serve the people in the photographs are ongoing questions that are not necessarily as easily answered in some ways. So this is updating now from a year and a half ago, just 5 days after the resistance in April 2018 began. Someone sent this picture from a Facebook page, so you now recognize that's the page of the book that I went around Nicaragua with. That was on my website. Someone took it off the website and took a photograph, I don't know if it's AP, AFP, etc., and writes 40 years later, 4 años después. So, of course, as this happens and this comes to me, the question is, do I rely on the eyes of those who are there? And there are many, many eyes there. What do my eyes need to see? What do I need to see to understand what's happening? And so I did, in fact, go back. It became incredibly important to go back, to just go back, once again, to go back. And what going back means is connecting in a way that I still feel we can't, though we do try to through the internet. It leaves me with many more questions that I do feel Nicaragua is still in a crisis. But of course, the crisis, and these were the photographs that were coming from ongoing, the days after I was there as well. So, in a sense, I'm going to leave you suspended with that question, because this question of whether or not, as witnesses, what we really are contributing, whether we're from a place or not from a particular place, this tremendous potential that photography has to connect us, the the fact that the potential for exchange and a kind of engagement, participatory, interactive, collaborative, these are the vital questions to me as a photographer now. And particularly in defending the rights of others or representing the rights of others. So I think, you could see this image, and to anyone who knows, it's very Nicaragüense in the sense that the barricades are the same, made out of the same stones, the Somoza stones, as they're known there. The masks are not that different. They're not just panuelos. They're wilder in some ways than they were in 78, 79. But you could also be making pictures like this, as we know, in Lebanon, in Iran, though you might be shot doing so, in Chile with under the water cannons, or Bolivia, or Ecuador, or ... right? We're living in a world that's in tremendous turmoil. So I think we need more witnesses. I don't want people to be afraid to be in the world. I want you to see the world. I want you to go in the world, and you will be changed being in the world. Thank you.
¿Alguna pregunta? Some questions?
Hi, Susan. I would like to know what is a typical day for you? How do you start to, for example, this day in Nicaragua, like 1978, are you always carrying with you camera on and just take the photo, or how is a typical day? Yesterday, what did you do in your day work?
Yesterday in Barcelona, first of all, is quite different than 1978 in Nicaragua, but that's okay. So I brought a small camera, and I ended up going with my iPhone to Tapias, where there's a fantastic exhibition. If you haven't been there, you should go. It's up for a few more weeks, I think, by Ariela Azulé, which I was photographing the photographs that she had found and was presenting in that exhibition, which is so rich. I could spend 3 days there. It's a very deep penetration and set of questions about making images and how they live in the world and what they tell us and what we need to learn to see. It's like the rereading that we need to all do, and it's a constant rereading. So that's what I did with my camera yesterday. I don't think I was photographing. I'm not a street photographer anyway. I wouldn't wander, though of course the temptation is fabulous. It's hard to resist on La Rambla because the performances are so fantastic. So I enjoy them, but I don't feel I have to always have a camera to be ready to react, I actually think maybe I need to, what farmers would call lay fallow, to be ready to give myself to something else, because I think part of photography is about giving, not just taking. Well, that's
thank you.
Maybe a way to say.
I have another one. Did you have a mistake in your career mistake that show you like a big lesson?
Oh, wow. It's interesting you think it needs to be a mistake to have a lesson. The Molotov Man has taught me a huge amount because, of course, the life of an image, I never thought about that. I mean, I wondered what happened to the strippers. When I reprinted, I did go back and find a few of them, but that was at a different timeline. Mistakes are interesting. Is it a mistake that I had 2 cameras and I missed the frame that I wanted in one camera and I got it in the other? Is that a mistake? I mean, the only other word I would object to is career. I didn't plan a career. I don't have a destination to be a career of orientation at all. It's sort of an intuitive following, as I said, the paths that open up, and anyone can follow those paths themselves. So it's not, it doesn't have that predetermined destination. I think that's an important thing. it worries me when I'm asked to sometimes I encounter that kind of thinking, and I don't really know. I mean, of course, you can be trained to be a teacher because you need a certificate. Of course, there are certain kinds of destinations because we live in a world of systems, you know. But I think it's always challenging beyond the structure of what you choose that you need for various reasons. We all need structures that we can also create ourselves, motivate ourselves, move beyond the structures that we're inside.
Thank you.
¿Alguien más?
Hi. It's really refreshing to kind of hear your positive attitude towards change in technology, particularly about, particularly from photographers who I like from 70s. How, because there is always this technocratic aspect. How has it like changed your, what do you make or in your process in general? Like how much have you adopted to it? Because like I hear a lot of photographers that I like, and they're like, I'll stick with film, I'm not gonna do anything else. This is what I like, and everything else is not that great.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different ways. First of all, about film. I mean, I was just earlier talking about a series of photographs that I found vintage prints of that I'm going to put into an exhibition, and there's one particular frame I can't find that photograph, and I really want that photograph in the series. And with all the great digital technology, the scanners, the printers, the new papers, we cannot match the quality of that vintage print from the 70s. And that really is something to think about, right? For me, that was really, no matter how, and believe me, with all the different tools we have, you know. So how do I deal with that, which is one thing. On the other hand, I showed you these mesh murals that could never have been done without digital technology, right? It's kind of extraordinary. They can make that the image that size that can resist rain and water, rain and sun and, you know, time in a place like that. That's fabulous. So, and the AR is a different kind of experiment, to go back to this essence of what can the subject or the photograph person participate and give back, and other ways that augmented reality could be explored that I'm still very interested in. Whether or not I have the answers to what would be next, each time I'd love to, if I could hang around. I don't even know if there's a master's here in design and technology, but if I were 20 years younger, that's where I would be. And I think on the other hand, one other aspect, I think if you may not appreciate, though, certainly this evolving, emerging generation of photographers who would like to work in the way that, in some ways, I worked. They can't work that way. They don't get the assignments. There isn't the support. There isn't on the front end or the back end. In other words, people don't want to pay for the photographs they make, and they don't want to pay them to make the photographs they want to make. Right? So we're in a very difficult time for documentary, long-term, in-depth kinds of commitments. I mean, philanthropy plays some role, there are prizes and awards and all of that, but you can't make a life that way. So that's the downside of what has happened. There hasn't been the upside of figuring out ways that crowdsourcing, of course, but how many photographers can benefit in all of our eyes. If all of our eyes paid to follow any one of you, maybe we could figure out an economic model to support this kind of work. See what I mean? In other words, there are challenges ahead to sustain this as a visual language and kind of commitment in life.
¿Más preguntas?
Thank you so much for this talk. It was so inspiring to hear your story and see how your work really unfolded through the years. So I'm very curious about consent, and you talked a little bit about this relationship that you built with the Molotov men. I've had situations when I was in the field and like working with very, very vulnerable populations and communities and taking photos. And I think perhaps before the internet and all this craziness of like the distribution of photos, when you took photos of the community, I think there was not so much of a risk of what was going to happen with that photo. And while today, when I was sometimes taking photos, I was like, I'm not sure what, the funder that is paying for this work is going to do with this photo, like how it's, we don't have as much control of how the community is going to be portrayed. So I'm really interested in consent, and I'm really interested in how perhaps your view of consent, in like asking for consent or seeing what would be proper to photograph or even share and what would not, if that changed throughout the years.
That's a great question and difficult, because consent and the word consensual, to what extent people who give consent even can imagine what the risks are. So even if you now have the capacity with a digital camera to show an image. I would have to send or bring back an image. So that's a huge advantage. But then when they see it, and do they like it, they don't like it, or do they understand what it means to have it unleashed in the world, So I don't think control is exactly what we don't have. We don't even have a control over the frame. We don't even have copyright over a frame. You can't protect a caption with the frame, in fact, when it gets published. You can't protect by copyright the caption. So there are lots of layers that you could feel the lack of control. And I kind of shift maybe to the counter, maybe the reason to make books, exhibitions, films, other ways to counter the lack of control, to find the ways more broadly to counter or to complement what you want the photographs to do. That's kind of all I can say. Because I think each of these situations is also very, very particular and time is moving. And in some cases, you'll be in a situation where somebody is desperate for you, whoever you are, just take the photograph, because take it away, they have this idea, it's gonna have all this power. And we all know from a different perspective how saturated the environment is and how little power they can have on their own. You have to make the spaces for those photographs. You have to find and create the spaces for photographs. They're just not there because they're there. So there are lots of ways I think, I'm always trying to figure that question out, really. You're asking that's the question, that's the first step. Many people just assume they have a right to make a photograph. And many more people now, because they all have the means of production to make photographs. And without the process that you all are going through, even reflecting and raising ethical issues or whatever, So we have an environment that it's like a contagious disease. Everybody has to make photographs all the time.
¿Más preguntas? More questions?
Hi, it's a real honor to be attending this talk. And I'm just asking about the girl show in Nicaragua. Some of the photos you were mentioned something like you were like the trusted observer. How did you make them at ease in front of your camera? Especially in the girl show, you went into their dressing rooms and you took very intimate photos, or also in Nicaragua, in this atmosphere, war zone, was there any staged photos or?
Well, it's interesting. I'm so glad you didn't say, so what was it like to be a woman and but that's the key answer, in a sense. I mean, I was a woman like the women that were performing, so there was a certain kind of comfort that in an unspoken way. I was living the life alongside them, these long, long hours of incredibly repetitive work. 45 record was maybe 3 minutes long. They probably did 40 performances or something like that in a night. So I was sitting beside them as they were coming and going and coming and going. I was listening to their words, their interactions, all sorts of. So you build trust over time. It's not the first. I didn't go in saying, I need this, I need that. And again, the pressures of, there was no pressure like that. I wasn't making the work for anyone. I was just trying to respond to see what I was seeing. I think in Nicaragua, in a way, being a woman had the reverse. It's like it was an advantage to not be seen as serious, to be blunt in the 70s, I mean, you have a fantastic show here, CCCB, Feministas, and, women there are performing themselves in very different ways and pointing to themselves and demanding they be seen and acknowledged. It was the reverse for me. I wanted to melt and assimilate. I didn't want to stand out in any way. And that was a different kind of advantage in a strange way, too. Less threatening in some ways. So, or not taken seriously, I think is another way to put it. But it's, I think a lot about yourself by just being, how you look at people, how you stand, where you stand in relation to them, how there's so many signals. It's not, again, back to the word consent, it's not literally consent. It's not so official. It's felt. It's people feel comfortable or they don't feel comfortable. You may not feel comfortable. If you're not comfortable, what do? How do you bridge the distance? You feel that you're not welcome. Do you stay and insist? Do you leave? Do you come back? All of these are part of finding your way towards what it is that you're trying to convey,
Thank you.
Más preguntas? More questions?
Hi, nice to meet you. I have one more question because we talked about your past works, but I'm curious to know if you are working on a new project and if you are planning to work on a new project and what is interesting you now in this specific moment.
So, someone asked what I was shooting yesterday. You heard that. So I think I'm doing a lot of reflective thinking, this process of putting together, a show from 40 years of work. It takes a long time to figure out what comes to surface, what are the interactions or interrelationships of that work. And as I said, and that show is now dividing in two, and so it has some more work to be done to think about these dimensions. So that's, in a way, the primary focus right now is looking deeper into the archive even than what I did to put the show together and find other more subtle aspects that I might return to. So, it wouldn't mean as much to give you those examples because you're not seeing the work, but I'll give you an example of the kind of thinking. It may or may not happen. I photographed in a women's prison about, I think it was about 4 years ago. And it's funny, I'm remembering this in a way to the first comment I made when I came in and saw the dinner party that's now made out of the ceramic students' work all around the table. So I'm giving you a free association. You'll see how my mind works. The dinner party by Judy Chicago was installed at the Women's Museum at the women's wing of the Brooklyn Museum in New York a number of years ago. And there was someone who had the idea to go to a prison for women and see what their reactions would be, what kind of, who they would honor as women, like Judy Chicago had done. So they did a workshop in a prison, and with the librarian, you know, they only can use the materials that they have, like foam cups and paper cups and things like that. And a friend of mine was asked to support, literally with the funds, to bring the work from the prison to the Brooklyn Museum to be displayed with the dinner party. And so she wanted to do that, and she asked me what did I think about that idea, and I said the only problem with that idea is that the women are going to be in prison and their work is going to the museum, and unlike all the other artists, they won't be present, and you'll never know what motivated the work that they're contributing to the museum. So I suggested making an AR sound installation, and we began to go to the prison, and we went to each prisoner, talked about why they had chosen the particular person to honor at their, you know, dinner party, which was installed at the Brooklyn Museum. And that was, I think, 3-4 years ago. In the last 3 years, 7 of the 10 women have left. They finished their sentences. Some of them had been in for half their lives, going in at age 17. So this is the project that I'm trying to think about. And I don't know the answer. I don't know what will be possible. Because whether or not they want to acknowledge that history, whether or not they're open to, whether or not I have the idea of how, it's not, is it about photographs? Is it about... That just gives you a clue that I'm doing work, but that isn't visible in photographs. And they may or may not have photographs at some point in time. I don't know.
More questions? Thank you very much,
Okay.
Susan.
Gracias.